And Gili.
Hey, hey. La la la. Let's just have this up and running. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. So let's dive right into it. Why vernacular? Why are we talking about ancient processes of building making in a post-industrial society? So, historically speaking, vernacular architecture is a type of architecture that is made by the people, not by trained architects. It is a kind of information that is passed from generation to generation and perfected over time. In doing so, the builders, tie an interesting knot between environment, the material is available on site, the traditions, their lifestyle, and perfect the construction process. The two of us are going to relate to vernacular architecture from very different schemes, I would say, in working with different societies, in Sename's case, and in design research in my case. What we're seeing in the background is an example from Algiers. And what is super interesting about it is the adaptation between the built environment and the natural environment. Building such narrow spaces, such dense urban fabric creates inner climate within the built environment that is much cooler than the outside because of the narrow streets, because of the self-shading that you're seeing here.
Talking about vernacular, I would like you to think about not only the obvious, the local resources, local material, local know-how, but also see another aspect of the vernacular, who is the social structure. And we are talking a lot at this moment about augmented humans. And one of the very first technology ever developed was for augmented humans, for enhanced humans. But this technology was the common. The society was the very first technology, and it was developed to augment humans with humans. And this aspect of vernacular is very important because vernacular, in fact, is the approach of production connected with social structure. And I show this montage to say that in the African traditional architecture, you have this aspect of the local structure, local way of seeing societies, who is coded in the architecture.
Rethinking material. So, in relating to design research, architecture or vernacular architecture serves as this infinite source of information, of proven processes, of correlation between material, geometry, design, and its performance. Working on a research, in a design research, in our thesis research performed at the Architectural Association School of Architecture under Emergent Technologies and Design Master Program, we were trying to think about what kind of architecture would fit arid regions, specifically thinking about the Northern Sahara. And in trying to dive into vernacular architecture, we saw the use of locally resourced material. Now, that was done because people didn't have automation. People didn't have industrialized and factories and concrete sent from other parts of the world to help them build. And nowadays we do. But the thing is, it's not a very good solution. I mean, nowadays, architecture as a practice is the 6th most polluted industry worldwide. So whatever we're doing at the moment, we're not doing it right, and it's time to think about new materials. And in relating to materials that are found closer to home, you're actually reducing your carbon footprint. So with that in mind, we set to design a project for an arid region in Zagora, in Morocco, and was trying to use Sahara sand as our main building material. Another way to rethink material is actually looking at what are the local resources in the form of pollutants that are around, because maybe we could repurpose them back into architecture. Maybe we could use them as binders, etc. In thinking about the existing pollutant industries in the Northern Sahara, a byproduct that is in surplus since the 1980s is sulfur dioxide. And there have been previous research in working with that material as a binder when you're working with concrete. Basically saying, making waterless concrete with that pollutant and Sahara sand. So we set sailed in that direction, and we brought about different recipes of that waterless concrete. And what we found is that its properties were actually better than portland concrete that is found in the business. Better in tensile strengths, better in compressive strengths, water repellent, and fits just our cause. Yeah.
And the social structure or the traditional structure I talk about is called in the architecture in Africa by the combination of a lot of concepts, and one of those concepts is the anthropomorphism. And the role of this concept is to see the material like the body of the architecture, and that helps to have a new rapport with the architecture. You don't see the architecture like something who is neutral, but like a parent, like a member of your family, and that prevents from some of the issue we have in the industrial way of seeing buildings.
Regarding fabrication processes, again, we're talking about a kind of adaptation between mankind, place, material, and its formation processes. So, in talking about vernacular processes, they're advantageous because they're low cost and they make use of very minimal energy consumption. What we're seeing here is the forming of bricks made in mud, available on site, using the same pattern, a kind of recursive process. We use very little, this requires very little resources. It has disadvantages. The volume that is created within that process is limited. And also, this is performed by hand. And this is performed in whatever climate we're relating to in this scenario, not the best climate to be around if we're talking about arid regions. So in that sense, we have advantages and disadvantages to it. What we were trying to adapt in our own processes is to use every soil found on site for both the material in construction and also base for forming materials. We use that waterless concrete and the soils that were found on site in forming and making our own bricks. An added value to it was that the sand used for forming could be recycled. And then another way of rethinking that production process was later in making it automated. So an increase in volume, an increase in speed, and then maybe addressing the problems that had to do with human life and how safe the process is, how safe the process of construction. Taking it a step forward, we're trying to think about how the two factors in that process could correlate, the human factor and the automated one. So here, two examples of fabrication processes done with robotic arms. One, sanding for execution of construction details, and the other one is assembly on site.
this is to show the potential of this new way of production led by the maker movement, who give us today an alternative to the standardization we have in the industrial approach. And what is interesting with this new way of doing things is that can connect us again with this collective aspect we have in our traditional architecture, and also have again those extraordinary form and shape we lose by entering the industrial age.
In talking about the shape of future cities, often in architecture we talk about style. What would we want to look like? And in the vernacular world, there is a very important connection between form and its function. A very early connection, not one related only to modernist movement as we know it. So here what we're seeing are two examples. One from the Siwa oasis in Egypt, we're seeing very thick built masses, thick sections, aimed at accumulating solar radiation over the day, creating very cool spaces in the indoors, and then releasing that accumulated energy overnight in coordinates with that diurnal change in temperature in arid regions, a nightly drop of 15, 20 degrees Celsius. On the other, we're seeing an Iranian example of cooling towers, basically saying we have here two ways of maintaining a cooler climate within the built environment that are so low in consumption of energy and has been a wisdom of vernacular architecture over years. In our design, we're trying to incorporate both. So an arid region settlement would have to do with very minimal fenestration, a very thick built layer to keep the heat outside and then maintain the heat and release it over time. And another take we had with this in mind is also in the level of urban fabric. How densely built should be that environment to maintain a cooler climate, or even in the shape of self-shading?
Yes, shaping the city is not only a question of shape, and we see it, I think it's also a question of collaboration. If you want to see the city in the vernacular aspect. But what we see in the new, this new typology of city, who is the smart city, is that the smart city don't plan to create smart citizens. It's not the plan of the smart city. But the worst aspect of this is that the smart city just try to achieve a process launched by the capitalism, who is to convert the human in an individual. And if you are an individual, you need to buy things. You don't have a collective around you, so you need a lot of devices to replace people. And in the smart city, you are the ultimate individual, because the city itself is like a prosthesis who do everything for you. So you don't even have to think when you are in the smart city, because the algorithm thinks for you. You don't have to talk. It is your data who talk for you. And you don't have even to feel things, because you have a lot of sensor who feels in your place. So the project of the smart city is to create the individuals. And what I would like to say is that African people are collective people. And by coming in Africa, the smart city will have to make a choice. Be civilized by African and come back here with this collective ethics, or the smart city will be will pass in force and will erase all the local structure and very social structure we have, again, in Africa, who are already challenged by those startups called, in the sharing called economy, who are just replaced by technology, what we are used to doing with collaboration, mediation, and social structure. So it is the challenge for the smart city in Africa. And if Africa won this challenge, it will be a win for the world, entire the world, because the demography in Africa will be urged, and you will have 1 human on 4 who will live by 2050 in Africa.
In talking about the digital vernacular and data-driven design, so this is a hot topic in architecture in the past few years. How we're making a design smarter, more adequately adapt to its surroundings, to the desires of its future inhabitants. And basically, vernacular architecture, in a sense, has been doing that for years, through experience, through a proper use of material and binding between material, form, fabrication processes, and its built environment. What is shown here is a section of our proposed design. This section incorporates with it those same cooling towers I was talking about earlier. But in talking about that, now, with adding several parameters to a design and running simulation of how it performs, we could generate it and tweak it to the best case scenario. Here shown in the form of indoor climate as a consequence. And in relating to those parameters, say a specific location, solar radiation on site, how much wind is available year out, what are the prospects of the next 50 years of climate change, we can address the design and the design process in such a way that one is affected by the other. In many ways, a design process that is affected by simulation is not a linear one. It's cyclical. So we get more information, we bring about a design, we assess it, and then run it back into a simulation and see if it's performing better or worse. Here, another example of solar radiation and a self-shading factor, aimed again at adapting between the built environment and hot, arid climates. Another example of it, the different concave shapes we proposed for a structure. When you're building with discrete elements and soil as main material, what you want to do is to build mainly in compression, because this is, this is what Earth is good for, without adding any added material. So here, in running generative algorithms and multiple parameters and looking for the best suited scenario, we were looking for the one that could address these issues.
And we don't have to forget that the smartest way to do things for people is to let them do it themselves. And so the big challenge right now is to develop the dispositif to help people do things themselves and own their data and use it as they want to use it for the benefit of the architecture and the city.
I like this point because I think it's a bit provocative. Human versus robots. So here we're talking a lot about the relation between mankind, production, and its environment as an ongoing debate of adaptation. One of the products of our research was, after creating that waterless concrete and working with it, is forming a kind of brick that could be assembled on site without any excess material, without any support, without any formwork, basically relying on its geometry for one component to hold the other. But what we had in mind is no longer the man building it, the people building it, but rather trying to make the best out of machine parameters and making new architecture with it. What are machine parameters? First of all, load bearing. So when we're talking about a brick, we're no longer talking about a brick that fits a human hand. It's not necessary. And in doing so, we could then make a component larger. We can think about a speeded process. And the added value of it is making, yet again, a form of new vernacular architecture achievable and low cost. The next thing we did is to check whether our proposed joints, who are also referred to as osteomorphic joints, that's a geometrical term, if they would fit on one another first, and if they would fit robotic fabrication that is aimed for on-site fabrication. And this is the robot at our lab. The idea, again, is to have a concave structure assembled gradually without any support. So before moving to the next slide, what I want to have, I think, is a concluding theme from the research part, I would say. The vernacular is a kind of super adaptation. It makes use of all the parameters available in relating, again, to site, to material, to the best suited solution for a specific scenario. And I think that with the additional automation and simulative tools, we can take these available solutions, like historically available solutions, and take them one step further, and adapting them to changing climates, and add more and more parameters to it in trying to think about a cheaper, better, and less pollutant environment, built environment.
Yes, the tendencies right now is to make you addict of device, and so isolate you of the group, so that you need a lot of device and not humans. And so we face a sort of big program of transfer of the complexity of the social structure in the complexification of the technology. And we need to reverse this process and put the technology not at the place of social structure, but at their service. And we can do this by study the way vernacular society works. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. I think we have time for some questions. So if you want to ask any question, just raise your hand and someone with a microphone will come to you. Are there any questions? Oh, over there.
Thank you for your interesting talk. I just wonder, I mean, you've been talking a lot about local societies, and then on the other hand, you've been talking about machines. Now, I see this as a good point for like a prototype to produce, optimized designs, for instance. But isn't it a contradiction to actually put a machine that uses a lot of resources into a place that doesn't have much machinery, that is very basic, and therefore isn't adapted and isn't really maybe even interested in machinery that is very, very high tech? You have man-made clay on the one side, or earth, and on the other side you have a robot. How does that go together?
Do you want to start?
Yes, I think machines are needed everywhere you need performance, even in what we call local or traditional societies. So the problem is not the machine. The problem is who built the machines, in which spirit the machine is built. Is the company who built the startup have this inclusion and redistributivity ethics? And that is the big problem. Is the community have the control of the machine? Did they own the data they generate by using the machine is the big issue.
And if I may add, I think your question is super valid. Like, are we taking with robotic fabrication jobs? Are we eliminating traditions? What are we doing to architecture as a realm, as a profession? And in diving into on-site fabrication in years before and years to come, and also with the high death rates within the profession, some professions should change, and it's about time. Especially when we're talking about such environments with harsh climate. But in relating to what Sename just said, releasing or letting go of a profession the way it is at the moment doesn't necessarily mean losing entire control over it. When you teach the people how to address machine fabrication, for example, this is the added value. This is where you take it a step further. And this is also where you can use local data or local traditions in reshaping what the machine does, if that makes sense.
The gentleman over there.
Yeah, great. I find it very interesting, the similarities which we see now between vernacular architecture and like what we call indigenous or traditional agriculture, because in the same way somehow data from nowadays is proving that what has been done for the past 2,000 years is a lot more sustainable, obviously, because it survived. And now the question for me is essentially this data property, who has the property about it. And I mean, if you are developing now a technique which maybe bases on a very ancient technique of how to make the building blocks and optimize it with data, if then the property right just falls into the hand of some corporation which can buy it and has a patent on it, the whole goal you have ends up actually not empowering the people, the local people, but disempowering them.
Here lies the importance of open information, always. As architects, as agriculturists, as people, that's such a major part of it. And I think also what the tradition that is being taught here in Republica, we generate all this information and we come here to share it. And the only way to fight information is with more information. So I would say this would be the first place to start.
Thank you very much.
Sorry,
No?
I was going to squeeze one very last one
of
in.
course.
And I don't even know if it's a question, but I was very much enjoying listening to your conversation, and I had the pleasure of talking with Francesca Brio earlier on in one of the other stages, and I was wondering like what it would look like if in an ideal world we would combine the topics that you spoke about and this approach of building cities from a different perspectives with her approach of building open data architectures and infrastructures, so sort of the vernacular open data infrastructure of the city. Just a small question to end on. Actually, maybe we'll just do that as a session next year.
Okay.
That's excellent. Wow, what would, can I answer it with an example? I'm not sure if the example is running still, but it was a good start in a good direction. In 2012, there was a project by Alastair Pravin and his team called WikiHouse. So the idea was to share a design and share all its files for people who wanted to see it, and basically building old models of 19th century farms originating from wooden architecture, but with open source. Everyone could go to the nearest store, make the same particles and components, and assemble it. 2 people, less than 8 hours, you have a home. Where would this go? This is a bottom-up kind of approach. And of course, in designing cities, you also need to think about where you're growing to and where the resources go to and where you would get water from or power, so you don't have an urban sprawl that people are actually living in poverty. I think the answer is in the meeting place of these 2 extremes. Like at one point, a system that would know how to absorb all of these bottom-up solutions and respond to it immediately. but allow for such a space. And it's a vast topic. I hope I managed to answer it. Cool.
Thank you, Gili.
Thank you so much.
Sename.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.